Good afternoon, students. In the final segment of our first lesson essential question, our goal is to wrap up the analysis of our NCSS report and then model an example of a written response to such a professional report. To begin, please think about how you would explain each of the terms on the screen. Pause the video and think for about 30 seconds. Which of the terms do you think means a collection of differences? I'd be holding up number 3. What about a term that means respecting those differences? I'd be holding up number 1. Which of these includes both religions and superstitions? I'd be holding up number 6. And which of these is something that can be proven by reliable evidence, such as an experiment or finding the information in a trustworthy source like World Book? I'd be holding up number 4. You definitely should be able to remember our legislative branch or our government branches as well. I'll give you a hint. They start with L, E, and J. Hopefully remember legislative, executive, and judicial. And as we studied at the beginning of this LEQ, each of those branches agrees that schools should be teaching students about religion, but they are careful that we are not teaching them how to or forcing them towards any specific belief. So they're giving us support, but they're also giving us guidelines. And after we explored some of those ideas in class, we then began to investigate it a little bit deeper by looking at this NCSS report. If you have not yet, please find handout number 4 in your binder. It should be in the Social Studies tab. If you never received it, you'll need to pause the video and read through the statements on screen and at least think about how you'd be annotating the text. You can then get the text from me when you return. Most of our classes have probably already completed this section on the front of the page. Make sure you have, and then do the annotations. Most of us went over this information yesterday as well. Hopefully you remembered that court cases are italicized with the names of both the plaintiff and defendant in the title. When you see extended quotes, so typically these are like when it's longer than 50 words if you're looking at the original, those are often indented and then in a slightly different font. That's a part of formal research style. And these ... ellipses are present in order to show when information has been removed. Next, finish the front of your NCSS report. When you're done reading the front of the report, answer the question that asks you to summarize. Pause the video. When you're done, I will show you my answer. I would have written something along the ideas of how teaching of is not allowed, teaching about is what we're supposed to be doing in school. And it's meant to be more informative, whereas teaching of is more persuasive. Basically, the way they set up their bullet points is the information on the left is what we should be doing. We should be trying to be academic. We're trying to raise awareness. We're trying to expose students to different views. On the right is what we're not trying to do, right? We don't want to be what they call devotional, which means actually going through the motions of the religion. We're not trying to force views on people or make anything seem positive or negative. Your next job is to finish the rest of the report, the back of handout number 4. Read the text, complete the margin jobs to try and focus your thinking and look back into the passage. When you're done, I am not going to give you the answers this time, but I'm expecting these to be completed, so make your best effort. Pause the video as you work. Now that we have analyzed the report, our next job is to try and respond to it, to try and put our thinking into words. I will often ask you to both read and write and discuss in my class because all three of those pieces work together to make us think. My objective is also to use this activity as an example of what I'm expecting from you on short answers on future quizzes and tests. We wrote the Changing Future essay, but that was more of a true formal paragraph, the type of more independent writing we're going to do. That's not something I would expect you to be able to produce in the middle of a test. It would just take too long. But I still want us writing on quizzes and tests because that's how we dig deeper, and it shows me that you can put your thoughts into organized words with clear conventions. So a lot of our writings will be what we call a short answer, typically just 3 to 5 sentences. The objective right now is to show you exactly what that looks like so that when we take our first quiz in about a week, you're ready to do a nice job on your own. Take a moment, read the prompt, consider the rubric, and then think about my green question at the bottom of the screen. Pause the video as you do. This is very typical setup for a prompt. It gives a little bit of background and then tells you what we want you to write. That context is important. This is the rubric that we will use on almost all of our quizzes and tests. These are kind of the core 5 elements that we are looking for. We'll practice using it a little bit at the end of this lesson as we score some examples, but it's useful to look it through to begin. In Dr. Staley's class, and when we started the Changing Future essay, we introduced the idea of FAT-P as a way to think about a prompt by focusing on 4 most important pieces. Hopefully, you remembered that FAT-P stands for form, audience, topic, and purpose. What I'd like you to do is think about where in our prompt you would identify each of those pieces. So for example, I'd put a letter F right above essay here because that is telling us what form we're going to use. Try and find audience, topic, and purpose on your screen. Pause the video now. Here's how I would mark them. Our audience is the school board, which means we need to write formally, carefully, very controlled. Our purpose, remember our PI words like inform or persuade. Our purpose is an argument, which is to persuade. And then our topic is why should middle school students learn about religion? Once we know the prompt, we're ready to actually begin our writing. It's very important you don't skip that first step or you're going to spend your 10 or 15 minutes writing about the wrong thing and receive a low score even if you're taking your time with the rest of it. That first step is really important. In class, students are going to receive this worksheet. I will give you an answer key version of it. Your job right now would be to find a piece of lined paper or blanked paper that you can write a little bit on. Pause the video while you do that. In class, the way this paper is going to be set up is that I've got a sort of very brief summary of what I'm looking for in a short answer response. We're going to look at the topic sentence, providing evidence, and elaboration, and how we do each of those steps really well. I guided students through creating those attempts, one on their own, piece at a time. Then I provided some teacher examples. I'm going to walk you through the same. For now, all you have to write down is your own attempt. So the first step, and what I'd like you to put on your blank paper, is a topic sentence. And when we're creating topic sentences, the most important 3 things you should be doing is using the prompt, naming your idea, but not yet getting into your details, and being sure to use precise nouns. As an example, in this essay, you wouldn't want to say we. That's a first-person pronoun and very unclear. Instead, you would say middle school students or kids at NOMS. You're using actual nouns to say who is the focus. Pause the video and attempt a topic sentence using the prompt on screen. You might also glance at handout number 4 while you're working. And if you're struggling with an idea, you can make your main idea tolerance. Compare your answer against mine. And I'm trying to keep mine short and simple so that people didn't have to write too much down in class. I made the kids here copy it down. You do not have to, just compare. Hopefully you can notice that I honed in on the specific part of the prompt we marked with a T. Some students get distracted by the extra information and then go off topic. Make sure you're being really targeted to what they want you to write about. And then I gave like the who, the where, and the what. Okay, that learning about religion encourages tolerance in students. That's one of the major ideas we've introduced in class, and it was a big part of the NCSS report. Your next step is to provide evidence. The goal of the evidence is to boost your argument or your information by putting very specific details from a credible source in place. For most short answers, this should be 1 or 2 short sentences. Do not provide too much. Don't write huge quotes. Don't list 4 quotes. Pick 1 or 2 focused quotes that support your point. Reference where it's coming from. Some students make the mistake of giving way too much evidence. I think part of that is because they were trained to do so in earlier grades so that they could get lots down for TDAs on the PSSAs. I think the other problem is some students would rather quote because that's just copying off of another paper rather than thinking for themselves. Starting in middle school, we want a balance. We want you to be able to provide evidence, but then we also want you to follow that up with thinking, with your analysis, and so we don't want to overdo it here. Follow the guide on screen, use handout number 4, use some of the evidence to present an idea. Pause the video while you write. Here's my example. You don't need to write it down, but compare it to yours. Notice that I'm naming the source. If we were being very formal, we should probably spell those letters out, but to try to keep it short, I use the abbreviation. Notice that I worked these pair of quotes into my sentence. You don't always just have to say the NCSS wrote, comma, and then put in a big, huge quote. Sometimes it's better to pull just really specific pieces and work it into your own language. The last part of a short answer on a quiz or a test is to provide what we call the elaboration, or sometimes I think Dr. Staley calls it the explanation. This is your brain work. This is where you're making inferences by combining what you've read with what you already know and think. It's where you're digging deeper. It shouldn't just be restating the quote, especially if your quote is straightforward. It's building on that evidence that you have presented by doing one of these things from my bullets. I don't think you need to try and do all of them, especially in a short answer like this, but these are some of the options that work best in writing. Pause the video, take a moment, attempt your own elaboration. Here's what mine would look like. And again, trying to keep it very streamlined, but I'm connecting this quote to some specific examples of how people will use this in their lives. And so I think I'm kind of showing why the idea is important. That in both their jobs and in the communities they live in, adults have to interact with all kinds of diversity. To do that well, having knowledge leads to tolerance. And I think this is really powerful in the idea that when we don't understand something, we tend to fear it. The example I give is like the dark. Children are often afraid of the dark, not because it's dark, but because they don't know what's there. They're uncertain of what might be lurking in the dark, and it's that creates fear. The same thing is true with diversity and other people. When we don't understand another culture or religion or person, it's really easy to be afraid of them or even angry with them because that lack of knowledge gets filled up with something. What you should notice is these examples we're creating very much line up with our rubric, okay? That when I'm looking for your essay, these three pieces are just a checkbox of like, is each piece located there? The topic, the evidence, the elaboration. These other parts of the rubric is saying like, are we staying on the right answer? And is the answer based on what it should be? Is it accurate? And then I look at conventions. Those 5 points are what you're going to get on most of your scores. The last thing we did in class was run through some example responses. Take a moment, think about how you would score this essay. I think there's one small mistake. I would have probably given them 4.5 points. I would have taken off a 0.5 point about the text evidence because they never reference the source where this quote is coming from. And that's really important. But otherwise, I would have given them check marks in each of the other categories. Do the same thing for example number 2. Read the text, think of how you'd score the rubric. You can kind of think of it as like check marks for full credit, dash, or 0. Pause the video and think for a moment. In this example, I would have taken off at least a 0.5 point for their topic sentence. I might have even given it a 0. I think they do have a clear idea all the way through, right? Respect, diversity, understanding, very similar to what we've talked about. And I think this quote is really clear, but I don't want you to be jumping straight into quotes. I want you to start with a topic sentence that gives the overall idea. Repeat the process for example number 3. Pause the video now. I would have scored this as a check mark for being accurate. I think they have a good topic sentence. I think they have text evidence, but then I would have given them a 0 for elaboration. I'd also give them full credit for the conventions. Their problem is they have 3 different quotes and no analysis. As I mentioned earlier, that's a frequent mistake and one that I will take points off of. It might not seem like a big deal to have just 1 0 there, but remember that's a 4 out of 5, which is an 80%. Most of us want more than that B-, and it shows where we need to be very careful in our writing. The example now had strong everything except conventions. This essay too would have gotten an 80% because I would have given it for a 0 for conventions. I think there's at least 6 or 7 mistakes on this page. Pause the video for a moment and try and identify those mistakes. These are the mistakes that I found. Pause the video again and think about how you'd fix them. All of these are common mistakes that I see in students' writing. Capitalizing the beginning of sentences is very important. Spelling, especially words like this that are homophones, words that sound the same but are spelled differently, you need to proofread to catch. In this case, it should be R-O-L-E. A space after each period is very important. Putting a period at the end of a sentence, particularly when there's a quote. In this case, it should be T period quotation mark, then 1 space afterwards. No personal pronouns. Truthfully, you could just delete that word. You could just say are influenced by beliefs. Many times these are just unnecessary. Capitalize proper nouns like the names of religious followers, and then remember that period at the end of the sentence, especially at the end of the essay. Many students forget that final piece. And congratulations, you've completed our first full lesson. We've introduced the big ideas, we took some notes, we read a report where we dug deeper into them, and then we showed our understanding through an essay. That's going to be a really similar process to how many of our lessons will unfold. You've also seen what an essay should look like now when you are writing a quiz. Keep in mind, most of our quizzes will be about a half a period in length, about 25 minutes. On a quiz then, I'm going to probably give one open-ended question. Not a lot, just one, because I think this whole process should take most students between like 6 and 12 minutes. And then there will be some other questions on the quiz that are more often like filling in the blank or identifying items on images, things like that. Be ready for that as we continue forward in the class.